each organization has different needs. And the beauty of WordPress at this scale is that we can pick exactly the right service to utilize rather than having to cannibalize a sort of integrated service or a module that's pre-existing within the platform.
Hello, and welcome back to the WordPress Edge, the ultimate destination for professionals looking to harness the power of WordPress for large-scale enterprise solutions. I'm your host, as always, Landon Depasquale. I'm an enterprise web strategist here at AmericanEagle.com. Today, I'm joined by Sean Blakeley, the director of the Enterprise WordPress team, and today we're going to be discussing whether enterprise WordPress is free or whether there's a little bit something else that we need to consider as we think about large enterprise builds. Sean, thank you so much for joining us.
It's a pleasure to be here, Landon.
I mean, you say here, but you're obviously not here in Chicago. Where are you, Sean?
I'm based over in the UK, so I'm from not so sunny Brighton right now,
Okay.
which is down on the south coast. So I get to be by the seaside.
Lots of seagulls, lots of tourists. It's a beautiful town, I hear.
It is a beautiful town, but I live slightly outside of it in the shadow of a castle. I kid you not. And so, like every Englishman should live in the shadow of a castle, I live in the shadow of a 1,000-year-old castle.
Well,
True
Sean,
to form.
perfect. Thank you for joining us. So what we wanted to talk about today is, I think there's a misconception around WordPress, which is that it's free. Now, obviously, everyone's going to go, oh, well, of course WordPress is free, right? I can go to wordpress.org. I can download the files and host them on any sort of platform I want, right? Or I could go to wordpress.com and have someone host them for me. WordPress is free, it's open source, but when we start talking about enterprise scale, WordPress isn't really free, is it?
It's not. So we can think about this in there's probably three ways that we need to think about it. So maybe where on other platforms you're paying a licensing fee, so that's where you're paying for the right to utilize that piece of software. Well, exactly as you say, Landon, that's not an investment you need to make within WordPress. WordPress is on a free to use license, and so it's open source. That means that contributors, many thousands of contributors across the globe, continue to maintain and add features into WordPress, but it's not owned by a singularity. So it's not owned by a private organization that oversees the development and charges the licenses for the platform. It is open source, so it's free at source. Now, as you said, it's not necessarily, that's not the only thing to consider, and it's not the only consideration that you should make. So there's kind of two other areas that you need to make considerations. One is that there is a mature marketplace around WordPress now. And so there are a number of plugins, some better than others, and we might talk about those in a moment or two. But some of those WordPress plugins are premium, so you need to pay for those, maybe a monthly or yearly subscription. And there are things like themes and e-commerce, extensions for WooCommerce, which is the kind of standard e-commerce implementation within WordPress. All of these come at a cost, and so we can think of these more akin to the licensing that we maybe see on other platforms. So as you extend WordPress, you may need to invest in some of these services. But then when we talk about enterprise, so utilizing WordPress at the enterprise level, we tend to lean less into this kind of marketplace, so these options, these off-the-shelf premium kind of plugins. But what we do is lean heavily into the expertise of the team. So developers that have built enterprise WordPress, built WordPress at scale at these large-scale implementations, manipulated the data and migrated data from all manner of platforms, and so that level of effort, that development effort, as we're facing unique challenges of unique integrations, maybe at enterprise level, we're implementing design systems and custom blocks and all manner of considerations. So that's really where the investment, that's where the effort goes into, is the implementation of WordPress at enterprise. So that is where the investment consideration comes from at WordPress at this scale.
That's a really important piece because not every WordPress developer can build WordPress at an enterprise scale, right? It's something that requires a maturity and an experience and a team of people that are capable of engaging WordPress at its core and unlocking the potential that it has to be an important part of an enterprise stack.
Yes, I mean, as you can imagine, if we think about performance as an example, or maybe conversions in terms of an e-commerce store. If you're running a few thousand sales maybe every week or every month, you don't necessarily have big performance challenges. You don't need to be too concerned about your architecture, the implementation. There's a lot of latency there that will sort of cover the spikes of your audience, of your needs. As you scale as an organization, or if you have a large enterprise implementation, well then, and particularly if you have high traffic, well then you need to consider you have very different considerations. So things like, the number of concurrent users. You can have things like racing conditions where you have users generating new orders or new content simultaneously, and so the system has to start to cope with different different challenges, and particularly at scale when you're talking about large scale of traffic or large spikes in usage. I think we have clients who see around the Super Bowl, we see very sharp spikes in terms of engagement. We work with other organizations that run events that they see very sharp spikes in their usage for these events. And so that requires a different architectural approach where you're able to, the system is able to cope with these very high traffic, very high usage, very high volume needs. And so as the sort of enterprise team, we need to architect around those needs. And so, often that's around thinking about where we're getting that data from, where we're generating that data, how we're caching or how we're storing that data, but also then, what the cost is of those performance hits. And particularly this comes into sort of e-commerce where, you know, milliseconds in terms of your cart engagement, can cost you conversions, can cost you sales. And so, this is where maybe we start to look at headless implementations, and so hugely performant, eking out every single performance gain that we can. And so really working back from the problem that we're presented, the challenge that as an enterprise organization and us as your agency partner, the challenge that we have together, then we can collaborate on finding the right solution to that problem. And so working back from that problem, implementing the right architecture to solve those problems. And so I think, that to me is the key, is that as you're implementing a smaller WordPress at a smaller scale, you utilize WordPress. There's no reason not to use many of the tools which are very fit for that purpose with WordPress at a smaller scale. But as you get to a larger scale, so your problems become different and become more custom and more challenging, and you really start to think about the problem itself and how you utilize WordPress to solve that problem rather than kind of vice versa.
So I think if I were to play back what I'm hearing from you, you need a mature team of developers that can create an architecture like the one that you've described. And that's either something you need to hire in house or you need to trust your agency partner to handle. But that's a pretty big undertaking.
It is, and particularly with modern WordPress, where sometimes you can build a headless application on the front end, so you actually move away from the sort of templating engine or how WordPress used to implement the front end of WordPress. You might build a dedicated application, so you've then got a team that need to be well versed in React or Vue or whatever you're building your front end application from. You need engineers that can move that data out of WordPress into that front end application, be it through the REST API or GraphQL, so something similar. And then equally, you need your back end team, your engineering team, to start thinking about WordPress as a data center, that it's providing data that's then being fulfilled by a front end application. And particularly if you utilize the block editor, and we would always recommend utilize the block
It's
editor.
the
It's
best
the very
editing
best.
experience on the web.
It really is. It really is. But you can also, and this is something that we've been pioneering and kind of spearheading, is utilizing Gutenberg. So having that very best editorial experience, but then pushing that content into a dedicated front end headless application. So you get the very best of performance. So maybe we should pause there for a moment just to talk about what the benefits are of that application. So if you build a custom application at the front end, that means that you're decoupled from WordPress. You don't doesn't have to be WordPress. You could remove WordPress at a later date and use a different system to power your front end application. So it's incredibly flexible, but also it enables you to integrate with external services in a very efficient way. So things like your CRM, maybe your search service, maybe an external database or a data source that you have sort of elsewhere, um, but also performance. So with a headless application, you can build a statically generated site or a kind of mixed, but it essentially is the most performant sort of implementation that you can make, because you can deploy that to the edge network. So that's deploying it to data centers all over the globe. And so you, Landon, in Chicago, would pull it down from a data center local to you, and I would pull it down from a data center local to Brighton. And so you and I would both have incredibly performant experience, and really be able to both experience an incredibly quick site, because it's being served up by relevant data centers to us as static content, so actually deployed on a CDN, much like an image or other kind of static assets. So that's often something that we talk about with larger organizations. Yeah, we talk about the benefits, the pros and cons of these different architectural approaches. And so having a team that's able to understand the benefits and potentially the drawbacks, or the compromises that need to be made, having a team that's able to engineer these detailed and complex architectures is a big undertaking. You need a lot of experience in this field. You need a lot of abilities that go beyond maybe a more sort of standard WordPress developer or standard WordPress experience implementation for developers.
And I think an important part of that is this is not just a technical question. In fact, I'd argue it's probably not even primarily a technical question. It's more a business question and an ROI question. Is does this offer what the business needs in order to fulfill whatever their goals are? So if their goals are conversion, does this ensure that we remove the friction or the blockers to conversion? If the goal here is education, you might need something completely different. And so I think to the point that you've made here, Sean, while these may seem like kind of difficult technical questions, they really are fundamentally business and ROI questions.
Yes, and this is where engaging with ourselves, with American Eagle, we can really help by leaning in and giving you access to that industry expertise about those decisions that other organizations have made, the best practice, the patterns that we see in engaging with multiple enterprise agencies, enterprise organizations in exactly this kind of paradigm, these challenges that the organizations face. Um, but you're quite right that it is, it's not just a technical decision, and actually the technical decision is secondary. That when we talk about business needs, when we start to map the needs of the business, where your ROI is at its highest, where we see opportunities and utilizing opportunities. Well, so in my experience, WordPress invariably bubbles up when organizations are considering the right things in terms of making their core decision, be it the platform decision or their architectural decision. WordPress invariably kind of is a very has a very strong offering in that area, because of its flexibility, because of its ability to scale gracefully in the right hands with the right infrastructure, of course, because it has the ability to also be very flexible as an ongoing maintenance piece. It starts to really become a very strong offering, and very competitive with other platforms, and often sort of supersedes what other platforms can offer. But there is sometimes an internal education piece or an internal alignment piece. We would be amiss to not be honest, to not be transparent about. Sometimes we can face resistance from CTOs. Sometimes we can face CEOs maybe who have had an experience with WordPress. Maybe they've used WordPress or it's been somewhere else in the organization. And whilst it wasn't a bad experience, they've pigeonholed WordPress as, that's its niche. It's a blogging platform, or maybe it's insecure. Maybe they've heard concerns in previous years gone by. And of course, some of those things were true 10 years ago, but WordPress has gone an incredible journey to really start spearheading some of the technology around the block builder and others, sort of within our industry. And it's really propelled WordPress to be at the forefront of considerations in terms of replatforming and your platform choice. And so, we're there to help with these alignment challenges, with these alignment questions. If there is some consideration within your organization, we're in a perfect position to talk about those choices, to talk about the pros and cons. And I think that's where our expertise becomes invaluable in terms of organizations making the right decision.
So, Sean, I'm glad you brought up other platforms because I think one of the misunderstandings is that the primary ROI of WordPress is that it's free and these other platforms have a license fee. And so, as long as you choose WordPress, you're getting the same thing that Sitecore or Sitefinity can do at its license fee for free. And that just really isn't the case, is it?
It's not. There's not a parity between these kind of platforms. And so the investment point is different. I mean, to be brutally honest, the investment point does tend to be lower and can be substantially lower building a WordPress enterprise platform than building the equivalent platform in other software. But it shouldn't be the primary decision driver. I feel anyway. Cost. I feel that WordPress brings so much more to the table than simply its cost consideration in terms of its so one consideration for me is that WordPress adheres to a backwards compatibility concept of its version controlling. So that means as WordPress evolves over time, so it will ensure that things still work in older versions. And it means that your maintenance cycle, whilst you need to always maintain to the latest version of WordPress and any dependencies that you have, the likelihood of breakage is much smaller and is reduced. It isn't zero, but is reduced. Now that simply isn't true on other platforms. On other platforms, there's often a sort of cliff face event, a sort of day zero event where they change from 9 to 10, they change from 10 to cloud, they change, and so these events are moments, are kind of cliff face moments where you have no choice. You're either stay on your deprecated version where you drift off into the sunset of custom support and custom maintenance and all the headaches that would include, or you have to gravitate to a new version and maybe there's a rebuild, maybe there's a big refactoring investment, and maybe there's a big invoice coming your way that wasn't expected because you weren't planning to build in 2023, but here we are, your platform has decided that you need to refactor to a new version. And so this is one of the great strengths of WordPress, and it gives it its longevity. And so for me if I'm sat as a CTO thinking about my ecosystem of sites or thinking about what I have in terms of my technical stack, well, like WordPress isn't going to pull any surprises. WordPress isn't gonna suddenly demand this huge reinvestment once we've gone through our initial platform build and implementation, and then much like as a kind of marketer thinking about the features that the platform has. And I think to your original point, Landon, about the parity of platforms. Well, no, WordPress being flexible is also kind of stripped back. It's stripped down, so it doesn't impose, a certain search platform on that you have to adhere to, or a huge custom build if you don't. And things like its media library is built not for enterprise scale, is built just to manage assets, digital assets at a smaller scale. And we could talk about other areas that that maybe platforms out of the box, things like Sitecore are more orientated towards these larger scale challenges, but WordPress utilizes other software to implement these. So things like a search service, things like a DAM, we achieve that with the very best software in the world. The very best services that we can for these sort of microservices for these elements, and that's where you need to really consider your WordPress, or carefully consider your WordPress architecture. And this is really where it becomes an architectural challenge, that WordPress is the beating heart of your implementation, but it is just one part of your technical ecosystem, and you will be pulling in other excellent services to sort of work with WordPress, to integrate with WordPress.
I think that flexibility is key. When you think about more monolithic software, there really isn't much flexibility there. But when we think about WordPress and its ability to handle a variety of different things, while it doesn't come out of the box with a enterprise ready digital asset management system, a DAM, it doesn't come out of the box ready for enterprise search. It doesn't come out of the box ready for personalization. It doesn't come out of the box ready for identity management. It's still capable of doing all those things because it's flexible enough to use, exactly as you said, the best in class software that anyone uses. You could think of whatever name of whatever third party you want to use for search or identity management or personalization or media management. And you're going to be in a really good spot. And so I think that's what makes WordPress so valuable.
It is, and I think it's what we've seen in sort of competing CMSs, if we could call it that, is that that sort of out of the box approach where you were buying the entire platform. What we found is that often organizations are gravitating away from these monolithic, singular solutions because they don't utilize many of the parts of the platform. Maybe they don't do personalization. I mean, personalization is always a great example because it sounds seductively, like, of course we want to do personalization. Of course, that's part of our offering. But actually, it comes at a cost, and that cost is the maintenance, the maintaining, the building of your logic, the maintenance of your conditions. There's all sorts of responsibilities, either as a unique seat, so a new seat in your organization, or as an external vendor, an external agency partner. But it's a big undertaking, and it's also, a potential diluting of your messaging. So as you personalize a message to Landon in Chicago or Sean in Brighton, so you're potentially diluting what Landon and I are experiencing within your platform. And I think it's a great example of, like, there's a much deeper consideration here, and there's a much bigger piece that we need to explore as stakeholders as to the value that this presents us to. But superficially, seductively, it seems, of course we want to bring personalization in. And so it's an interesting example because it's one that we often see organizations gravitating away from this out of the box solutions because maybe they're not utilizing these elements. And then the other piece, of course, is that their offering may be superseded by better offerings out in the marketplace. I mean, I would suggest a service like Algolia is second to none in terms of the search space at the moment. They've just relatively recently acquired Search.io. Their Algolia's offering is incredibly powerful, incredibly strong. They're now folding AI into that offering to make it even a richer experience for end users. And so that's a good example of utilizing the very best technology, the best software that we can. And that's what WordPress enables us to do. And I think what we're seeing from other CMSs is that they're going more modular in terms of their approach. And so it's more of a kind of opt-in modules. But WordPress gives you even greater flexibility than that we don't have these pre-configured opt-in modules. We really do enable you to utilize the very best technical fit for your needs as an organization. So some organizations, an IDAM isn't relevant for them, or maybe the search isn't something that's relevant, or maybe the personalization. Each at this scale, enterprise scale, each organization has different needs. And the beauty of WordPress at this scale is that we can pick exactly the right service to utilize rather than having to cannibalize a sort of integrated service or a module that's pre-existing within the platform.
Yeah, you have a more customized architecture that does require more thought and more consideration, but it means that that architecture is tailored to you, and you're not trying to shoehorn or crowbar in something that isn't really made for the problem you're trying to solve into that space just because, well, you bought the suite and that's what's a part of the suite. And so you're stuck using whatever that offering is.
So that's exactly right. But also, for me, it's also about being kind to your future self. So if you think of yourself as a decision maker, and you're deciding, am I going to go with this monolithic platform or that monolithic platform? Well, it's a tough decision to de-risk, and so you just hope you've got enough data points, you've made enough good decisions that that's going to play well, because what you're trying to be is a soothsayer. You're trying to predict your needs in 5 years time, or maybe 10 years time. 5 to 8 years is probably the sweet spot that we see for a full replatform. But a full replatform is an incredible undertaking. It's an incredible drain on your internal resources as an organization. You need to, or ideally, you would bring in a champion for that project, maybe a product owner internally to help run and decide and define the value of the platform, the implementation. You'd be collaborating with an external agency to decide, what direction of travel and where the priorities are. And it's a big piece, and it's a big undertaking for any organization. And of course, it introduced risk. It introduced risk in terms of the outcomes of that project, of the whether you've judged the success measures correctly. And even if you've got it right today, who's to say you're going to be right tomorrow? Who's to say the industry isn't going to shift? There's not going to be a paradigm shift, a new challenger in your sector that's going to mean you're going to have to rethink all of these things in 18 months. And of course, you didn't see it coming. How could you? No one in the industry saw it coming. And so for me, the best defense against these changes that we see all the time in different business sectors, particularly, I mean, let's take another example, AI. If we're looking for a paradigm shift, here it is. We are on the precipice of a huge change across multiple sectors and multiple industries. So what's the best position to put yourself in? It's a one of flexibility. That's where you need to be. You need to be in a position where you've got something as your core platform, something like WordPress as your core platform. Then, as we talked about a moment ago, you've got something like Algolia powering your search. Maybe you've got Salesforce powering your CRM and your other, sort of your customer record, and then all manner of other things that you could have integrations with. But you can pull one of these services out if another offering comes into this space which is better suited to your needs. Well, then you can pull that piece out of the architecture. You can switch that out. You can change it, but you don't have to re-platform. You don't have to do another huge undertaking with all of the challenges and risks that come with re-platforming. You can just remove that piece of the architecture. You can supplement that piece, and in fact, this kind of approach to architecture means that over time you could change most or indeed all of the services within your platform, within your implementation, as you adapt and evolve and change to the new opportunities that come your way. And so that for me is incredibly powerful. It's about being kind to your future self and de-risking the future for your organization. And so having that flexibility and having those microservices, those other external integrations, means that you can utilize the very best in the world in terms of those services. You're not reliant on decisions that have been made at a platform level, potentially years prior to your needs as a business. And I think that to me is critical. I can only see this disruption increasing in many industries, particularly around AI and undoubtedly other challenges that we haven't yet foreseen. And so having that ability to flex, having that ability to reposition bits and pieces of your architecture, I think is incredibly powerful. It means you can respond to the market in a way that maybe your competitors can't.
I mean, what you've described here is the ideal that everyone is trying to achieve with the composable architecture. But I think the beauty of what you've described is that unlike a lot of modern takes on composable architecture where it is just a bunch of pieces then and there is no core and so it all just kind of flows here and there's nothing stable to anchor it. With WordPress at the center of your architecture, you do have a stable core that will always be the foundation that orchestrates all these other pieces that are integrating into your stack.
Yeah, and it's probably a very good way of thinking about it is thinking of WordPress as that foundational piece, as the foundational piece of software. And interestingly, it might not be powering your front end application. It might not be powering what traditionally WordPress has done previously, but it is the integration point. It is the piece that glues everything sort of together and helps to bring consistency across the platform. But you're quite right. It is thinking about composable not as a disparate group of bolted together services that somehow you have to try and make them collaborate and work happily together. That actually with WordPress, you've kind of got that. You can lean into WordPress and its ability to get these services to work well together. And look, there is no better proof than what's out there in the marketplace today. Like, go and see what incredible things Sony and Disney and New York Times and TimberTech and all manner of other organizations have achieved with WordPress at its heart, and then these other supplementary services that are part of the same ecosystem.
Sean, that was absolutely fantastic. I think we could probably spend another hour going into this, but our time is at an end. Is there anything you'd like to leave us with?
I think it's just that this moment in time where we have this opportunity to really start to own our thinking about our business on the longer term. So where we're making decisions today, where we're making platform decisions today, but starting to think about actually that flexibility for the future, that flexibility for the next 5 years or the next 10 years. That to me feels like an extraordinary opportunity that rather than as a business, falling into our 5 to 8 year rebuild cycle, and we just kind of fall into it again come, it's sort of 2030 or wherever you are in your sort of cycle, but actually starting to think about this incrementally. That if we implement something as flexible as WordPress at the core, and we bring in these other solutions, these other services, well, actually, we can start incrementally improving this. And so we start to think about continuous development, continuous deployment, where we're just making small changes, or maybe we're making a replatforming change, but it's still part of an ongoing ecosystem. We're evolving our platform rather than these kind of ripping off the band-aid revolutions that happen every 5 to 8 years. And so I suppose, for me, that's the thing that's truly exciting, is that I think this perfectly chimes with some of the methodology around technology and the ways of implementing technologies around Scrum and Agile, that really plays very well to that notion of continuous improvement. Investing a little today, keep that investment going, and you can continue to iterate and improve rather than doing these big monolithic builds every few years. I think that's where it's very exciting and really sits very well, I think, with the enterprise mentality.
Fantastic. Sean, thank you so much for your time. We always appreciate you joining us.
Wonderful, thank you.
As always, my name is Landon Depasquale. I am your host of the WordPress Edge. Thanks for joining us here at the bleeding edge of WordPress. Until the next episode, feed your WordPress obsession. And if you have any feedback, thoughts, comments, angry rants, please direct them to our email, wordpressedge@americaneagle.com. Find us wherever you listen to your favorite podcasts. Thanks a lot.